So for the gardening, what would you say? I don't want to get into it too much because it's another conversation. The GMOs and all these other pesticides and harmful ingredients that are in our foods these days, that's definitely another main reason or why we definitely should acquire our own skill of gardening.
We touched the topic of inflammation earlier, but it's basically your body's autonomic nervous system rejecting the food that you eat and having this chemical reaction to saying, hey, this food that you ate, I digested it, but it wasn't really the healthiest thing you could have eaten. So I have to fight, like activate the autonomic nervous system to fight off the bad parts of this. And inflammation or inflammatory response comes every time you eat something unhealthy. If you eat too much unhealthy stuff, eventually disease will form. Basic common sense. You keep doing something that's unhealthy for you, eventually you'll get sick. So if you stop triggering that inflammatory response, you'll be healthy. Now, what are the foods that trigger inflammatory responses and what are the foods that don't? That's where really the skill of gardening comes in. And of that, there's two broad categories. There's the food that can grow naturally without trying to use pesticide or without trying to control it in too many ways. And then there's the food that you have to micromanage in order to grow. Realistically, if you try to grow corn, you're not going to grow corn without tilling lots of soil. So I want to go back to the story of Adam and say, hey, Adam was in the desert, he moved into the forest. And God's like, okay, well, there's two ways you can live. There's the Cain way, and then there's the Abel way. Abel's a shepherd who keeps his livestock secure, and he offers a fat offering thereof. Cain is the tiller of the soil. He keeps tilling. America has completely automated their food production to be 100% tilling based on corn, soy, and wheat. That's where 90% of the food comes from. And every time you eat that tilled food, you're going to have an inflammatory response.
The cosmetic industry is now even getting into the more natural and organic resources of ingredients, and that is detrimental to the environment. So they're trying to be sustainable. It's a counterproductive effort.
But from a sustainability perspective, you keep planting that food forest, it's 100% sustainable, and it will provide you a lifetime of nutrients.
Okay, so now let's move on to skill number 4.
Skill number 4 is the skill that we discussed at length in the beginning, which is fasting, which is not just about what you eat that's healthy, but how frequently you eat. That's also just as important. So fasting would be skill number 4. And then the 5th skill is really about learning how the animal realm works. We discussed the trees in the skill of gardening and permaculture, but the skill of animals is really about shepherding. Every prophet that ever existed was also a shepherd. They took care of the animal realm because the animals feed the trees and the trees feed life. Without the animals, you don't have trees.
So how does it affect our bodies when, let's say, the cows are grazing all day? You're saying that it's not good for us to eat all day. How about cows and things like that?
But just like there's inflammation in the human body, there's also inflammation in the animals. If you keep them fed all day, there's lots of inflammation build up.
If we eat an animal with inflammation, would that in turn go into our bodies as well?
So you are what you eat. That's a very age-old saying. So if you're eating something that's highly inflamed and possibly highly processed, then you are going to become that. So we discussed the food forest in skill number 3, and now we're discussing the animals that feed the food forest. If you look at the natural, how human species have existed throughout time, there was nomads, hunters and gatherers. That's how we evolved. And then we started building civilization and said, hey, let's start tilling the soil and controlling the animals. We have this farming, and we've evolved that in its 21st century form, which micromanages every aspect of food production. But we've micromanaged it to increase consumption, not necessarily increase health of the individual and health of the environment. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, the natural way to create food is to have these herd animals graze from forest to forest, walking through deserts for weeks in between.
Right.
You have these herd animals that are in the millions, and it's how you manage them that it becomes essential. If you manage them in a way where they're sitting in a confined area feedlot, which is what we have done in the modern industrial agriculture,
that's all
and
they
say,
do.
hey,
graze all day.
Graze all day, and then we create that poop and we put it in water and dump it into our waterways, and that's how we're gonna, create these algae blooms that are causing mass toxicity in our lake system. That's really damaging to the environment. Or you can have these cows graze over the deserts and actually try to deposit the fertilizer in the desert and try to create forests in the desert by planting trees behind them in their wake.